it the way that read that she would go today or yesterday to have?
It was, I think, general was better than I do. I know the name, and I think those guys all went to school together. I just wonder if she found out. Because she's having an MRI to see, like, when it yesterday or something. Yeah.
Fever puny, or is he got other stuff?
Well, are they in Alabama? Well, I don't know. Something makes me like they were not Humboldt.
But now maybe.
Oh, but they might have gone to.
They may from
They might be in.
No, Humboldt was in Tennessee.
Oh.
Near Jackson.
Oh.
Originally. I may have that wrong.
I don't know.
You know, this is back before there was an Ava. Because Virginia's oldest is like a week from Ava's age.
Yeah. I didn't know that it was cold wet. It's a girls' class. Oh, Mike's in here. It's gonna be a long ride home.
Or a long walk. Whoa.
That's good. You just keep on meditating.
Here's he's got his buddy. Here we go.
There you go. Yeah. Now there's somebody else in here. I was afraid Mike was the only man in here with all these ladies. Other than our teacher.
That be scary.
I know. Maybe for Joe. I'll move. Bye.
Well, maybe we'll find out.
I'm going to go out this way. It's
been
a long day.
It's
been home.
You don't know anything about that.
I just want
Was something made you feel like that was done yesterday or today?
Judah doesn't, because she was waiting on the
It depends on what the results show.
Yeah.
We'll know.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did John get this?
Troy didn't have to go. I know, there's little children. I know. Virginia and Mom and Dad. And that was before their name and name.
You know, like pivot point. I'm not gonna. I'm leave that for John.
Yeah,
Cover five and that's the very beginning. That's all I'm. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Because I read an article.
Well, I don't know that you could, what can you really do? I mean, if you get it, you get it. You don't,
Yeah, celebrate the one thing. Right. She shouldn't make it.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna get there.
Oh, okay.
You over by yourself?
Annoying. Okay.
We got 10 people and y'all are spread out as far as you can get.
Yeah.
All right, ladies, here we can start now. All right, I do think it is time to start. We are in lesson 10 of your workbook, page 49, which is going to cover chapters 5 through 7 of Esther. We are not going to cover all 3 chapters tonight. I'm going to begin, and one of the Johns, either First John or Second John, we'll finish this up on Sunday. So again, chapter 10, page 49 of your workbook, and Esther, we're going to begin in chapter 5. But before we begin, let's start with a word of prayer. Mike, would you please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for another good day of life in this place that you have allowed us to exist temporarily until while we wait for the coming of your Son. We thank you for all of the blessings that we have through him and through his sacrifice. Please be with all those that are not able to be with us today, to help to heal them, return them to their much wanted health. Be with Joe as he leads our minds in this class discussion today. Get us all home safely this evening. In Jesus' name we pray.
Thank you. Yeah, John is still under the weather, so he asked me to fill in for him tonight. So again, if you had one of my classes before, you'll probably know what I'm about to say. I am not the teacher. I'm the student that has to stand up the whole time. Okay, so I do expect and appreciate everyone's participation. So, Dan, would you read the first 4 verses of chapter 5?
All right. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite to the entrance of the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even unto the half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king."
Okay, thank you, sir. So, even as queen, she had to approach Ahasuerus or Xerxes, whichever name you want to use there, honoring him as the king. I mean, she dressed herself in her best royal attire and put herself in plain view to be seen. Now, let's go back just a little bit. How did she become queen in the first place?
She was chosen out of the many virgins in the country, I guess. They
Okay.
all gathered together.
And why was there a group of women there?
Because they requested a replacement for
Right.
the first queen.
Yep. Yes. And again, she was the most beautiful, at least in his eyes. She was the most beautiful of all the other women there. Right. So he hadn't seen her in a minute. Our first question here. The chapter 5 begins with this reference to the third day. What is this third day in reference to? That's right. That's right. Now, why were they fasting and praying?
She was about to take her life in her hands by going before the king. She had asked for requests that the other Jews in town do the same thing.
Yeah, so this was a 3-day fast / prayer. They were petitioning to God for what they needed here. You know, understand, because she was fasting and praying along with everybody else, she was dressed in her most domestic, her most humble attire she had. It's why this chapter or this verse begins with, okay, now she's getting into her royal clothes. She could not be seen in front of the king, or she couldn't approach the king in her humble attire. She had to fully dress up as the queen she was. Okay, she had to put on her best. Now, in this same verse, it reads, as Lee just said, "I will go to the king, though it is against the law. If I perish, I perish." Now, what is this all about? What does this mean? Why would she be afraid for her life? Why would her life be in jeopardy?
Weren't supposed to go to the king unless you were summoned.
Absolutely. You know, in terms of this royal mindset, someone doesn't ask the king, hey, can I see you? You have to be asked by the king to be seen. It was just, again, it was that level of hierarchy here.
And she hadn't been summoned, as it said earlier on. She hadn't been summoned for a month or so.
Yeah. Go back in chapter 4 and somebody read chapter 4, verse 11.
All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court, who is not summoned, he has but one law, that is, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days.
Okay. So again, that's Esther speaking. I mean, even the queen can't ask of the presence. She or anybody else has to be, summoned. I hate to use that word, but that's the best word I can come up with. Has to be summoned by the king. So, now to give him, a little bit of a way out here, we don't know how long this law had been in place. We don't know if he enacted it or if it was in place, with the leaders before him. So, again, I can't put it all on him, but that was the custom in the Persian Empire, if you will, because remember that's what we're framing here. Verse 4, Esther asked him and Haman to come to a feast. Now, what was unusual about that request?
Adding Haman.
That's part of it, yeah. As we saw in chapter 1, though, the emperor would have a feast with the men, and the queen would have a feast with the women. They didn't commingle with these feasts, but you're absolutely right. The second part of that is having another man in the seat of honor besides the king, in front of the king. that's simply unheard of, right? So, very, very unusual request. Don't just kind of go past that without understanding, all the ramifications that we have there. So her request was to be granted. Why not, anything she asked for, we'll see it several times, anything up to half the kingdom, right, is going to be granted. Her wish is going to be granted. So why not go ahead and ask for the decree to kill the Jews to be rescinded? Why couldn't she just go ahead with that? Now, keep that in mind. Let's keep reading and see what we see. Okay. Chris, would you read 5 through 8, please? Chapter 5.
Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast, and I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said."
Okay, thanks, sir. So Ahasuerus sends for Haman and Esther, as Esther requested, and they had this feast. Now again, we've read this several times. They're not going to have a feast without a bunch of wine, right? I mean, these are some wine drinkers. I think he had a permanent grip on his hand for a glass of wine. So, again, she could have asked, but instead she asked for them to both attend this feast. Okay. Again, he assures her, asked her again what her request is. Again, grants her request up to half the kingdom. Where have we seen this before, where a promise is given before the request is even made? Where have we seen that before?
Herod and Herodias and her daughter.
Absolutely, right. So again, she's gonna set up. You know, she did this first feast. Now she's gonna set up a second feast the next day. So why do you think there was a second feast? Or sorry, go ahead.
I think she was both trying to pique the king's interest and his curiosity as far as, wow, what is she really going to ask me after all this? And just trying to soften him up a little bit. And in Haman's mind, it's continuing to elevate him in his mind because of the egotist he is. So it's just setting the stage so that she can spring her trap.
I agree. I mean, she was not only setting up Xerxes, but she was setting up Haman as well. But I think there's one more piece to it. Now, do you think God told her to have a second feast? We don't know, but we talk about God's providence a lot so far. What would be another reason you think she would have this second feast the next day?
Maybe she lost her nerve.
Maybe
she lost her nerve.
You know, I think she was just nervous, and especially in front of the king and in the royal palace, to ask for him to take out his drinking budget.
Okay. And it's also because of the law. You know, you don't go to the king, and since he has asked her what her petition is, she's still leery about sharing that with him, and she wants to confirm his reception of that 5-second feast.
Yeah. You know, I guess. Yep. Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking of another case when David was going to kill Nabal and Abigail. Is that right? Nabal. Yeah. With Abigail. How she went and humbled herself in front of David. I just feel like Esther's doing that same thing, just elevating him.
Yeah, I think women's intuition goes a long way back, right? We'll kind of put that there, but I wanna read God's providence into this, right? Has Haman run across Mordecai yet to get all bowed up, for lack of a better word, right? Right?
He's got one more time.
Absolutely. So, you know, again, as Mike had alluded to, the trap's been set, but it hadn't been baited, right? Haman hadn't had this encounter yet with Mordecai. So again, I don't think God told her, hey, do 2 days of feasting. But again, God's in control, right? God's in control no matter how bad or desperate things may appear. Okay? All right. Question 4, I think we just covered that. Again, the second. So, who would like to read for me 9 through 14?
Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house, and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches, and the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king. Yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made.
All right, thank you, sir. So, these verses really kind of focus on the character of this Haman. Let's look at some of these characteristics, and I guess what kind of mood does Haman have with these feasts? And kind of park that for 1 second. I want to look at some of these characteristics of Haman. So, he had great riches. Remember how much money did he give for this edict to go out originally?
10,000 pounds.
Yeah, it was enough tax revenue for all of Persia. Just to kind of put it in perspective here. His family. He had a pretty large family. How many sons did he have? 10. Persian society held in very high regard any man that was father to that many sons. Okay. His position in the kingdom. What was his position? If you remember back in chapter 3, what position was he given? Yeah, basically the right behind the king, right? He was the second highest ranked man of Persia. And what's interesting to me, again, he wasn't Persian. What was he?
He was
Agagite, which basically a Canaanite, right? And just as we had answered or talked about with our question number 5, he was the only man given a place of honor with the king and queen at these feasts. I mean, again, I think she went out on a limb by doing so. To have another man given a seat of honor with the king being present, that was, I don't want to say risky, but it was risky. But yeah, so I mean, he thought he was all that, right? He was all that and a bag of chips. He had everything going for him. But it only took one man, a Jew, not showing him the honor he thought he deserved. And to take the edge off all that, take the edge off everything he had going for him, his true character comes out. And, we see anger, we see pride, we definitely see pride, we see revenge. Now, I will give him a little bit of credit. He showed restraint by not killing him right there. Now, again, that would have probably had some other ramifications. So, he's not a dumb man to be the second in command, right? But he did show some restraint, even with all this pride and anger, running through him. Any other characteristics that you see with him in this scene?
Well, he already knew that there was a proclamation to put to death all the Jews in the kingdom anyway coming down the road. So that probably helped him control himself, knowing that he's only going to have to put up with this Mordecai guy for a little bit longer.
Mordecai guy. So does this ever happen to any of us where something doesn't go our way and someone sets us off and we focus on the negative side of it, the negative circumstances, so much that we forget all the blessings that we have? Does that happen to any of us? Well, it happens to me, and when things don't go my way, I try to focus on the good things, but that's one thing I'm constantly working on. So didn't know if anybody else had experienced that or not. Question 7. Does his wife and friends tell him to forget about this guy and give him some good advice?
No.
Huh?
No.
No. The short answer is no. Yeah. What advice do they give him?
Build a gallows.
Build a gallows.
Which comes back to life in the end.
Huh?
Which comes back to
Yeah,
life in the end.
we'll see that later for sure. He built it 50 cubits high. All right, now we learned this and as youngsters, right? How long is a cubit?
About 18 inches.
About 18 inches. How'd they measure it? They have it like a cubit stick, like a yardstick? How'd they measure that?
Finger to the elbow.
Elbow to finger, right. And everything always came out looking very nice. Just with that.
Everybody's elbow and fingers were just the same.
They kept dragging the same guy around.
You feel the line.
Now, I'm not 100% sure, so those with more Bible knowledge than me jump in here. But, you know, I know the text says hanging, and I know gallows were, you know, you typically think of hanging when it comes to gallows, but I don't think hanging was part of the Persian methodology for execution. Again, somebody knows about this, please speak up. But you know, again, I know the word in the Bible says gallows and it says hangs, but Persians usually relied on or went to crucifixion or impalement as their method of execution. So whatever the method may have been, whether it was impalement, hanging, whatever, the intent was still execution. You know, however you want to pull it off. But does anybody have any history on, you know, the Persian form of execution or the preferred way?
Not necessarily, but I'm gonna go with what the scriptures say.
Okay.
Because historians would have told you for a long time that the Romans didn't crucify him. And eventually, even the record has come out, the proof has come out that they did. And dig deep enough, I bet you'd find where the Persians actually hung people.
Okay.
That may not have been hung by the neck like we think of today.
Right.
It may have been hung on a post or something.
Yeah. So whatever the method was, it was going to be execution, right? And again, 50 cubits, you know, roughly cubit being 18 inches, we're talking 75 feet tall. This was going to be a public spectacle, no matter what the method was going to be, right? But instead, his wife and friends giving him good advice, you know, his friends just basically yes men. You know, they're not gonna do anything or tell him anything, you know, because of his position. They're not gonna put themselves in a bad position. So the plot thickens here. We got Haman on one side, we got Esther on the other side, and Xerxes in the middle, right? So let's see what happens next. Somebody read the first 5 verses of chapter 6. Who would like to do that for me? All right, Sam.
On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Elkanah and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in."
Thanks, Hank. So, insomnia sets in. Xerxes not able to sleep. Had the book of memorable deeds of the Chronicles read to him. Now, how many of us reach for a book at night when you can't sleep, right? Something very boring to knock you out, right? So, question 8 in our workbook. What did he learn from this reading? What was the reading? Turn back to chapter 2. And Darla, would you read 21 through 23? Chapter 2, 21 through 23.
In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.
Okay, thanks. So, this was part of the reading, and he learned that no honor had been extended to Mordecai yet. So, this is really bringing our picture, or bringing our story forward. Really, it's really kind of setting the stage for what's about to happen next. And
very providential too, because if he brings the Chronicles in and he just kind of opens it up and starts reading, there it is.
Yeah.
So I think it's God's providence that it was open to that page.
I think that's what I was going to say. We asked why she asked a second time to do another banquet. If she prayed and fasted, like, we don't tend to do that and say, God, I'm going to do nothing and you show me what you want me to do. She kept asking for the feast, and God kind of answered her with this providential thing happening.
Absolutely. We've talked about providence, and I think this is yet another clear indication of God's providence and God being in control. From the timing of the insomnia to the reading of the Chronicles, and go back to the 3 days of fasting and prayer, just like you're talking about. Answered prayers are not miracles; they are providence. I mean, that's what answered prayers are. So, the Bible is very specific in what it says, and it tells us they had a 3-day fast, and there's praying along with fasting that we read at the end of chapter 4. So again, found this interesting. Again, Bible's very specific in what it says. Why was Haman in the king's court so early?
I just want to talk about the gallows.
He couldn't wait to get Mordecai executed. Right? I mean, he was there. Now you got to think how early in the morning this was. I find that very, very intriguing. Okay. Would you read 6 through 9, Star? Yes, please.
So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'"
Okay.
I don't know how the man got through the doorway. His head was so
You read my notes there, didn't you? Yeah.
He's just been dreaming of this for forever. Like, he just had it all ready. He's like, "Here's my speech."
I mean, his head has got to be 3 feet wide right now, right? But again, is this a case of mistaken identity, or is this again, God's providence? Xerxes asked Haman, "What should be done to the man who the king delights to honor?" Again, Haman's head is blowing up. You can just see it swelling, right?
And that's what he wants to be done to him.
Yeah, I mean, he's thinking, "Oh, this is what he's going to do to me," right? Haman suggests, I want you to really pay attention to this. Haman suggests the highest amount of honor that could be given to someone. You go back. Let's go back through that again. Verse 7. "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought." Now again, not just plain robes, but which the king has worn, "and the horse," not just any horse, but the horse that the king has ridden, and whose head a royal crown is set. He wants to, again, have the full king attire, and everybody will recognize that's the king's horse, that's the king's robe, that's the king's crown.
Well, I think as we said, I forget if we said it on Sunday or before that, but the Persians considered their kings as deity. So this wasn't just a king, this was a god. It was a big deal in the extreme.
Yeah. And I mean, again, Esther could have requested that the edict be rescinded, days ago. But again, call it women's intuition, call it God's providence, call it all the above, but it just, again, everything's happening. God is still in control of everything that's happening. Any other comments or questions up to this point? Okay. And then I'll pick up here. I'll read beginning here in verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man who the king delights to honor." Now, you're talking about a bitter taste, right? You're talking about a bitter taste in his mouth. Oh, I guarantee both. I mean, yeah, one was just an appetizer for the other. I mean, he had to swallow every bit of pride that he had to do this. But again, is he going to follow what the king tells him? Absolutely. You're still second. You're not first. He's going to do exactly what he's told to do. So, any comments? Any questions?
He's getting set up. He's still getting set up even higher for a bigger fall.
Yeah, and again, doesn't that go with pride and we should look in the mirror to see what we can improve on, not how beautiful we are. We need mirrors, and when I say mirrors, I'm talking about the Bible, right? The Bible is the standard for us. If we use the Bible as our mirror to evaluate ourselves, we should never get that high on ourselves as Haman was. Now, again, we got to look out windows to see who we can help, but we got to look at mirrors to dig into our own selves, to improve our own selves with the Bible as that mirror.
I think it's interesting, Joe, that God wasn't just satisfied with just having him humble. God humbled him. And not only did he humble him, but he exalted Mordecai. Exactly. And so he is, God here is making a public demonstration of how he feels about Mordecai and how he feels about Haman. And the man like Mordecai, who was a Jew, and at this point I began to wonder, what's Xerxes beginning to think now? Right. He signed a proclamation to execute the guy that just saved his life a few months back. So, but yeah, God wasn't satisfied, but he wanted everybody to know.
Right.
And everybody to know for years and thousands of years to come that this is the way he feels about this kind of pride.
Because again, it's going to be written down. The facts are going to be known as we read them today, right? Anybody else? All right, we're coming up to a very pivotal point of the book of Esther, and I'm going to leave that for John on Sunday. I don't want to take his thunder. I've gotten to the point where I wanted to, but there is one more slide I want to share with you, just a kind of a thought you can leave with. There's a fine line between pride and self-worth, and again, you can read this. I came across this in my studies, but just again, there is a difference between pride and proper self-worth. It is false humility when we pretend we do not have capacity that we do have. Proper self-acceptance does not require one to pretend that he has no capabilities. It only requires that he remember that he did not create his capabilities himself. You know, again, tell it like it is, but always be thankful to God for everything that you have. Because again, we didn't do anything of ourselves. It's all God-given blessings. So, yes, sir.
We didn't read the next verse, but I think the next verse tells a lot about the difference, the contrast between Mordecai and Haman. It says, then Haman returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home mourning with his head covered. Mordecai had just been given a fantastic honor, and it was all over, and he didn't parade himself around after that. He just went back to his place and sat down. You know. So, what does that tell you?
Yeah. True character, right?
True character.
The true character of the man. Yep. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Just trying to, like, you know, we started off with thinking about why did, you know, Esther go in and not tell right off the bat in the king's palace. And I mean, sometimes I try to envision exactly what's going on there, and sometimes I see it like the king's just sitting up there, like, waiting for people to come in the door. That's probably not the case. I mean, it's his throne room, right? I mean, what do kings and rulers do in their throne room? They have meetings, they have appointments, they got work that they got to do, right? So this law is like, it's not just, hey, if you come in uninvited. It's like, if you come in uninvited, you're actually interrupting something. You're interrupting important business that the king is having with someone else. You weren't invited to this meeting. You're coming out of time. And that may have put, even though the king found favor in her sight, or found favor in Esther, he still might be a little bit off, and him and, you know, the relationship with him and Haman was good enough. It almost seems like she could tell that first night, the circumstances weren't right. You know, Haman wasn't in the right place. You know, the king may not have been in the right place, and so she's like, all right, we got to delay this a little bit more. And in her wisdom that God had given her, like you said, you know, the insight that she had to say, we need to delay this a little bit more until circumstances are perfect. And God was 100% fine with that, and said, you know what? Let's line this thing up. Let's just make everything for the next day exactly the way that we're looking for. We're going to make Haman just, that second day is it completely switching his attitude. You could just imagine him being drugged in there, and the way that his face is just falling, right? He's just going, look, if you're against this Mordecai guy, you're in trouble. So the circumstances for that second night were just absolutely perfect. And just the fact, too, that, you know, when we get later on, it's known that this giant gallows is being hung. I mean, he's probably already sweating just coming in there after this occurrence that's going on between Haman and Mordecai. And there's word getting around that Mordecai's just about to get hung. I mean, there's a lot going against him. And that may have been the cue to Esther to say, all right, it's time. Tonight is the night to actually lay this out.
Yeah, I mean, we've read several verses describing her beauty, but I think her wisdom equaled her beauty. And I say her wisdom again. God's in control of everything, right? But again, as we started in chapter 5, you know, she knew she had to be summoned, but she was in the exact right place at the right time to be summoned. I mean, she positioned herself there. She did the feast the second day, just like you're describing. So, you know, again, I think her wisdom equaled her beauty, and that's just Joe's opinion. But you see that throughout.
The other thing that maybe it was that she was too timid, and this was just God's way to say, hey, don't worry. I would have made it all work out that first night if you asked for it, but you know what? I'm going to make you more confident. This might have been God's message to Esther too. Ask, and it will be, you know, given, because everything now lined up for her, and she was no longer afraid to say what really needed to be said.
Right. Especially after she saw what had happened to Mordecai. After seeing him honored like that had to bolster your faith.
Good point. Because everybody saw that again. You're on the king's horse, you're in the king's robe, you're in the king's crown, and you're being paraded around town.
That's number 2 man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I the only one that's impressed that they built a set of gallows 75 foot high overnight? I wonder if it's all the hammering that kept the king.
Any other comments? All right, y'all be quiet. Y'all go ahead. Pretty good. How are you? All right. Oh, it's good. Appreciate the comments.
What's up, Matt? My second manager had the secretary right up behind his door.
Yeah.
If his door was open, it was usually just whatever, walk the head down, question for you. But if his door was shut, I don't know, I knew what was going on. Carpet, can I run there? Or does he even go in there? No. There's kind of, she didn't exactly have a separation.
You don't do it. Get with Cindy, they'll want to go by hand and photo replay. I got my table out of the shop and in the room, so we can, we have more room.
Oh, neat, okay. What about, what, 1 inch? 1 inch?
Yeah.
Sounds good, thanks.
I could be in the car with them. Music talking to somebody, I could play it and I get. Have you heard of that, Martin?
I have.
Oh, hey. Oh, hey, that's so crazy. Thanks. You're in there. I can't believe that. Let's keep sure car. Thank you. You know, it's a hard time and you end up with all these